Shalom Aleichem, Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brodt. It's a pleasure to have you back. Although this time, it's something different. We've never done this before. The world just lost our Gadol, our Sarah Torah. That's how he's referred to. Moran Harav Chaim Kanievsky ztz. And both of us know that we have no business even discussing his gadlus. There were so many sides to Rav Chaim, whether it was his asmada, his chayvis, his eitzes, his adracha, his simchas achayim. But we figured there's one small nakuda that we could focus on and maybe bring out a perspective that may not be focused on elsewhere, and that is his Sefarim. And to see, we all know he wrote many Sefarim that were written on mitzvahs of Torah that have not been touched before. But if we could see and understand how Rav Chaim was able to take his knowledge of Kol Torah Kula and produce the Sefarim that he produced, that may be an insight, from a different perspective, a different angle, of Rav Chaim's gadlus. And it should be a zikaron. It should be a zikaron, and it should lift us up to be able to want to learn these Sefarim and look into them. And it should be a ilu nishmasei, whatever we could do, a little bit for ourselves, to be able to take away and grow a little bit from this big Aveda. So how are you today, Rabbi Eliezer?
Everyone's busy. I'm already ever since Matzah Shabbos, writing or saying their thoughts about Rav Chaim Kanievsky. So I decided, for my own benefit, that I'm going to add in my own 2 cents into the mix. I'm sure others will say similar things that I'm saying over here. They'll say it better, or some maybe already did say it. But when a gadol of such a caliber is nifter, it's only proper to reflect on what we lost and what we can learn from his highly productive life. Ever since I heard the news right before Shabbos in Eretz Yisrael, I started going through my mental files of what I knew about him, pulling out various Sefarim of what I had purchased over the years, and tried to analyze a bit the greatness of this guy, of what I saw in his written words. I'm trying to put in words what I saw for myself. And as always, we tend to take for granted something we always had. We thought that Rav Chaim would be the person would be the greeting Mashiach, especially this is a topic he was Isaac in. I'm doing this also specifically because I feel not everyone is familiar with the real Rav Chaim. What do I mean, the real Rav Chaim? It's okay really for a gadol to mean different things for different people. There's different aspects of a gadol or character traits of a gadol that talk to different people. And Rav Chaim was no different. Just as an example, there was a great gadol, the Chaim Sofer. The Chaim Sofer had hundreds and hundreds of talmidim. Two of his from his greatest talmidim, one was the Maram Shik, and another was Rav Chaim Sofer, author of the Machne Chaim. Both these talmidim learned by the Chaim Sofer for many years, and their main Rebbe that they held was their Rebbe that they got everything from was the Chaim Sofer. If one would go and pull out and sit down and learn a Chuvas Maram Shik versus a Chuvas Machne Chaim, you would not believe that these two people sat by the same person. What's the explanation? So I heard many years ago from my Rabbi Spitz, that different people focus on different things from a gadol, and you could have to such an extent that they will take out things that you can't imagine that both taking it out from the same person. So to Reb Chaim, for some people he was a Baal Meifis, for other people he was an advisor for Das Torah, all different issues, lines out the door for hours and hours, getting brachas. People sought his advice from all over the world on all different things in recent years. That's what spoke to some people. Others were upset about these things. I have no interest in getting involved in this. For me, what's important and what I'm trying to stress in the presentations that will follow is the legacy of Torah, what he left behind, his productivity and his incredible amount of Sefarim that he wrote, and what we could possibly learn from them, what made them so unique, and what they stood out about them.
Okay, excellent. So I'm trying to think back. I grew up, Rav Chaim was already the Sar HaTorah, Rav Chaim was already a Gadol Hadar, Rav Chaim was already a household name. There were actually other Gedolim, Manhigim. When I was growing up, Rav Chaim became, the so to speak, manhig of many streams or sects of Klal Yisrael, over the last bunch of years. What's your first encounter? What are your first memories of Rav Chaim?
So interesting is that my first introduction to him was in elementary school in the United States in the late 1980s. While I used to collect, those days it was common collecting Gedolim cards, Gedolim pictures. At that time, it was considered very rare to have a picture of him. Somehow, I got a few. Just to show, here was the from the 5 pictures of him that I had. These were some of them, and it was considered very rare. Barely everyone even heard of him. At the same time, an extra special picture was to have a picture with him and his great father-in-law, Rabbi Yashiv. This was a picture that I had. This was extra expensive because it had both of them. And interesting, in those years, Rabbi Yashiv in America at least was not as famous either. We're talking about before the internet. We're talking about a whole different world than today, where everything is it's a whole different world. Whispers in those days was that he was the son, Chaim Kanievsky was the son of the special great Goyin that everyone knew about, even in America, the Stipler. And that was how I first was introduced to him. As time went on in my high school years, I started to hear about him a bit more, but I cannot pinpoint what was the first encounter that I had with his Sefarim, but I do recall that it was his Sefer Sicha Sada, which we'll get to talk at great length, but it'll drop today, which was what got me to learning some of his Torah.
Okay, so as mentioned, Rav Chaim wrote many Sefarim on all different areas of Torah. And what's unique about Rav Chaim's Sefarim is that there's so many different styles of the way he wrote his Sefarim in different places. So obviously, we can't cover everything today. And hopefully we'll be able to do some more of these and talk some more about Rav Chaim's Sefarim. So which Sefer particularly do you want to speak about first or now?
So first, I want to just give a drop of background before I get to the Sefer that I want to talk about. Is as follows. Rav Chaim Kanievsky had tremendous. There was different people, different Gedolim were tremendous influences on him and his writings. Particularly his uncle, the Chazon Ish, his father, the Stipler, the Mishnah Berurah, and the Vilna Gaon. Throughout, not so much today, but throughout the next presentation, or I have no idea how many will be, but to discuss his goals and what he was writing, what he was trying to do, and to put it in somewhat perspective, to show how these Gedolim that had an influence on him, it also influenced in his particular areas of writing, his way of writing, what he chose to write. But today, looking around, one will see that there's so much material about him. Now, it's very unique that we have. Normally, when a Gadol is nifter, they first start writing about the Gadol. What was so unique about him, his history. Everyone scrambles. Even in recent years with the internet, a lot of times when a Gadol's nifter, for example, when Nosson Tzvi Finkel was nifter a few years ago, so the Mishpacha magazine delayed printing it because they felt they're not going to do justice about him, and they have to scramble to get information to write about him, at least for the first issue, and then as time goes on, they add more and more. Rav Chaim Kanievsky, already in his lifetime, there's a wealth of information about him, and because in recent years people have been fascinated by him. Just to mention, because we're talking about the Sefarim, there's a Sefer written. It's called HaSefarim. The Sefer is put out by a family member in Bnei Brak, and this deals with a lot of interesting things, a lot of the backstory of a lot of things about the Sefarim of Rav Chaim Kanievsky. And what
have you ever seen this Sefer called HaChovis? Fascinating.
Same author, correct. That is the same author. He also put out a Sefer HaChovis, which we also will eventually get to discussing that. And what you see is that sometimes it takes years till you get the backstory of why he was writing the Sefarim or what was his interest, and fascinating side facts about the Sefer. A lot of it's in these Sefarim already. Another thing is that there was a fellow, someone who was zeicha to get very close with Rav Chaim Kanievsky. His name is Rav Tiger, and he has a few booklets and a few beautiful videos with conversations with Rav Chaim Kanievsky, which are kedai to see on the internet. You get to see Rav Chaim Kanievsky in a whole there's no fanfare going on around him, and he talks to him about Sefarim and different his writings, and he helped him. He used to comment to him, and it's very interesting to see. So these just this is just a tip of Shabiyam of what there's out there on the internet, or people. There's so many people that spoke to him, and we're talking about a year that was 94. So there's people, a lot of people had to do with him, and people have different angles and different insights and whatever. So it's just out there, and obviously some of the things from the Sefarim we'll use in the following presentation.
You mentioned Rav Tiger. I've also seen different clips. Rav Chaim seemed fascinated about Rabbeinu Yeruchim with the Beis Yosef's Haggais on it. Did you see that? Have you seen that? Like different times he spoke about it.
Yeah. It's very interesting. It's just like they're small clips, but they put them up on the internet already for the past few years, and they're fascinating. I find each one of them very, very full of nice, cute pieces of information, tidbits, as I like to call them, anecdotes.
Maybe before you
now,
Rabbi Eliezer, maybe before you continue, is it known like how he wrote his Sefarim? What was his mahalach? You mentioned Rav Tiger. I know he was involved in editing. What was his mahalach and how he wrote the Sefarim? Do you know?
I mean, through this thing, some of the pieces of information that I read or I saw from different people, I'll mention when we get through discussing some of the Sefarim. But the first, in this, the sefer that we're going to talk about shortly, maybe it might come out yet to talk about it. But and just two last points before we actually get down to the first sefer that I would like to talk about is as follows. Rav Chaim Kanievsky was a man that we know he finished Shas, Bavli, Yerushalmi, and many other areas of Torah yearly, made a siyum on it for years and years and years. This is also demonstrating the sefer that you showed us, HaChayvus. He had this thing called Chayvus, which basically was every day he had a quota of how much he would learn of different Sefarim, starting from the Bavli, going on to Yerushalmi, to finish every year these Sefarim, which is remarkable. But it's not just that he... So he did it. It's not like he did a Shnai Mikra V'Chatargum, so he added to Shnai Mikra V'Chatargum these Sefarim. We're going to see in the course of what I hope to discuss how that helped him in his Sefarim, what he was able to do, which was unparalleled. Now, Chas v'Shalom, I'm not coming to compare him in any way to the but there was a quote that there's different versions of the quote, but basically Rabbi Avram ben Agra, when he described his father, and Rav Chaim Volozhiner similarly when he described his Rabbi the Gra, when he wanted to discuss his yeda, how much information he knew, how much Torah he knew, so he said a sentence, which he said a few sentences. That's it. He learned Mikra, Mishnah, Halachos v'Agados, Safra, the Sefer Talmud Bavli v'Yushalmi, v'Toseftos v'Chol Habraisos, Ad she'aya Mishnasei Sedur b'Fiv. Then it says he also knew and he learned carefully Safra, Sefri, Tosefta, Pirkei Rebbe Eliezer, Yushalmi, Talmud Bavli, Seder Olam, Ma'aseh Bereishis, Sefer Cholos, Sisrei Torah. This is what they said about the Vilna Gaon. Now, some people when they heard it, they said, okay, they said it about him, but who said it's true? Because at that time there was nothing printed from the Vilna Gaon. In his lifetime, he printed nothing. And then slowly, today, for example, we could see we have the Gra wrote on all this, and it's something incredible. That Torah is it's not to take away from any other gadol, and we're not playing anything, but to see that how vast Torah is. It's endless, and that someone went through it in a systematic oifin and knew it all and wrote about it. We have it. It's not like even a thing that they just said. And similarly, the Vilna Gaon had a special unique Talmud, Reb Zalman Volozhin, the younger brother of Chaim Volozhin. And the same thing they said about him. What was he baki in? So the quote goes, Rabbi Cheskel Feivel, who knew him personally and wrote an incredible work called Toldos Adam, he knew Kol Sefrei Tanach Merosh Ad Seifai. Im Shalish HaTargumim Unkelis Yonasim Ben Aziel B'Targum Ksuvim. Then he says, he knew Shas Bavli Yushalmi Safra Sefri Mechilta Alfasi Rambam Tur Medrash Rabbah Yalkut Shmoini Seid Olam Zayir Tikunim. Now, these are incredible quotes, and these are of our special Gedolim that we had a few hundred years back. What's remarkable is when you read these quotes and you hear about what they say about Chaim Kanievsky. It's amazing that he also, someone in our generation that just was nifter, also was someone that knew this. Now, again, by Rav Chaim Kanievsky, we don't have to wait 10 years, 20 years to see it. We were zeicha to have it in the Sefarim that he printed in his lifetime already from a young age. He was started to work on them, and we have them today. And that's what's remarkable. And we will discuss through the presentations different Sefarim. Okay.
Fine. With that fascinating introduction, so it sounds like you have one sefer that you want to focus on now. Which sefer is that?
So interesting is a sefer which I took a liking to many years ago. It's called Kiryat Melech, which is a sefer which is Makairis on the Rambam.
The Kiryat on the Rambam. So many of us have gone through the yeshiva system. We know many different Sefarim on the Rambam. For some reason, Kiryat Melech is not, on the top of the pile. So maybe take us through what it is and what kind of sefer it is, and maybe why isn't it on top of the pile?
Okay, so the truth is that this sefer begins with a kuntris. Rav Chaim Kanievsky, as I mentioned earlier, he had this thing that he went through Rambam dozens of times. He made it it became into his chayvus that he would do daily, and he would be messiahing it yearly. But it seems he learned it many times, maybe even before those chayvus. And at one point in the late 1950s, he published. I don't know if he published it then, but he finished a work called Kuntris Shar HaMelech. This was a kuntris on the Hagdama of the Rambam to Yad HaChazaka. As well known, the Rambam has a fascinating introduction to his Yad HaChazaka, where he outlines different things, including a lot of historical information, the Seder HaDairis, and certain interesting facts about Torah Sheba'al Peh. Very, very important sefer kedai to learn. Reb Chaim worked on the sefer, and he wrote an incredible work using to show the Makairis of the Rambam, where the Rambam was basing this, because the Rambam doesn't say where he got all what he says from. And he wanted to, and when does he finish it? On Leil Purim Tafshin Yud Zayin. That's how he writes. Now, we find out now the backstory is why did he rush to finish it then? Because he wanted to give it to his father as a Mishleich Manas on Purim, and he gave it to his father. It's one of the Sefarim that he gave his father as a Mishleich Manas. There seems there's another sefer at a different time he gave his father also. Now,
is this a discussion that's brought up? You allowed to give Sefarim for Mishleich Manas? You Mekayim Mishleich Manas?
So I don't know if you're allowed to, but it has been discussed, and there's a lot written about Sefarim that were. It seems that sometimes it was more just, an excuse, not because you're Yaitza necessarily, but it seems that sometimes it might have been they Pasha didn't have anything, so at least to be Yaitza some aspect of something, so they gave Sefarim. But there's a lot been written about. People have collected which Sefarim were actually given for Shalach Manas. It's famous, the Menois Halevi, Mechir Yayin, and many other Sefarim were written as Shalach Manas to different people. The Mechir Yayin was written, Ramah gave it to his father, etc. A lot has been written about it.
Yeah, so whether you Mekayim the mitzvah or not, Pashtas not, but it's certainly an Inyan. You find the Gedolim have given Sefarim for Mishleich Manas. Okay, continue.
Now, so in this sefer he does what he's mefarish mamish called tag shabbatag of the Rambam into kuntris. Where is it found? In the sefer Sichas Sada, which I mentioned earlier, which includes in it a few different chiburim, small chiburim of Reb Chaim, which some others will discuss at a different time. Now, then a little later, he put maybe even a year later or something, he puts out a sefer. In the back of a Rambam, he was asked by the publishers. He had a chibur. It's called Kiryat Melech. Okay. So what's the Kiryat Melech? So Kiryat Melech is a chibur, which is, as it says in the Shar, and the Shar is written by Rav Chaim Kanievsky, Tziyunei Mekairis Rabbim al Piskei Rambam, where b'makaymes asher Rabbi Seinu noise kelev hanichu chelek umakam hanichu lesgader laba machareim. Also some corrections, and it's first printed in 1958 in the back of a Rambam. Then it's printed again and again, and each time Rav Chaim Kanievsky would add more and more tikkunim. Sometimes he added 1,000 more makayros and another 1,000 more makayros, and eventually today, if you buy it, it has at least 6 more editions, with each one has additions and corrections and stuff about it. Okay, this sefer, as opposed to almost all other Sefarim of his, has askama from who? His father. And his father writes about it. I was asked by my son, I guess, to write a askama, and he says, "Beroish sifrei hanifla." But then the stipler says, I don't give askamas. But then he says why it's amazing to be that he came to sources of the Rambam that people were not oimid on. Okay. Then Rav Chaim writes a Hagdama about it, what he did, how he learned the Rambam, and he learned it again. And you can see from here, from the various Hagdamas, he has 3 Hagdamas in the different editions, how he mamish sat and learned the Rambam. And basically, it's a few 100-page work where he has makairis for the Rambam. So now, before I get to explaining what it is, what's so significant about this, already in 1970, the Sefer impressed people of all types. So much so, Lamashal, the stipler, Rav Chaim Kanievsky, had a relative, an interesting person, not for now, named Professor Sol Lieberman. He was asked to recommend a tremendous Talmud Chacham who he felt should get a funding from a certain prize. Which project should he recommend? So Lieberman wrote in a few different suggestions, and he writes that this is in 1970, specifically about the Kiryat Melech. He says as follows. He says, I feel that there's a who should be recommended for this prize. Rav Chaim Kanievsky of Bnei Brak. It was called the Rothschild Prize. He says he published already at that time a half a dozen works. One of them sources on the Rambam, which was published separately. He says then he says his notes on the Masechtas Ketanes has no parallel. He's known only among a small circle of scholars because he didn't write his name in his works. And he writes so much so that he's even more impressed with Rav Chaim than the stipler, and he was into the stipler plenty also, his relative, he knew him well. Anyway, this letter was discovered by Professor Mark Shapiro. He printed it once a few years back on the Sefarim blog. Eventually someone took it without permission and put it on Matziv, but they did attribute it to Mark Shapiro at least, but he didn't give it to them. But this is a fascinating letter because we see even people that understood the Rambam, which I'm going to hopefully explain the significance of the Sefer shortly, were blown away by this work. So now with all this, the stipler and so to speak, Shol Lieberman and many other people, they say that they in one of these places I saw, even Shmuel Rozovsky quoted it once in Shir, and they told the Reb Chaim about that also. But there's something very unique about the Sefer. So the Shai is, what's so unique about the Sefer? As you asked us, you asked me just a few moments ago. You learned in yeshiva and you never heard about it. And I'll be honest, in yeshiva I never once heard it quoted either. In all different, I never really heard it quoted. So what's so unique about it? So to backtrack, one must understand the following. You have to have the following context. The Rambam wrote a Sefer, Yad HaChazaka, which everyone's very familiar with. Immediately after the Rambam wrote the Sefer, there was a problem. What was the problem? There's no Makairis. Where does he get what he's saying from? Now it seems possibly the Rambam was himself going to write to explain where his sources were from. Maybe he changed his mind, that he realized that he shouldn't have. It's a arichos not for now. Now, so already from when the Rambam wrote his work, made it available, Rishonim for the past, and then Achronim also for centuries, and then in the yeshiva world also, one of the things that people try to do is to understand where did the Rambam, why does the Rambam say what he's saying, where does he get it from? So in the yeshivish world today, in the past 100-something years, it's this is famous. The Brisker the Brisker world is very into with Reb Chaim and the descendants afterwards, with using different methods that they have to understand Reb Chaim's, to understand the Rambam. But already, but beforehand, also people were oisikin to understand the Makari's Rambam. Now, to quote something to help us get context of what the significance of the Sefer was, there's a famous letter. The first time I remember I came across it, I did not believe it. I Pasha could not believe that it was real. And just like there's been other letters of the Rambam and other materials of the Rambam that people thought are forgeries, some are taka forgeries, I thought maybe it's a forgery, but then I looked into it. It's not a forgery. It's 100% authentic. And a lot has been written about this letter. And basically, a Talmud of his was learning a shtickle Rambam in Hilchos Reitzeach, and he couldn't, and he wanted to know the source. So he went to the Rambam, his Rabbi, and said, "Where's the makar for this?" And the Rambam, and this is the letter of the Rambam. We have even Shilat prints it from the. I think we might even have the Arabic edition of it, even Hayoim. But the Rambam starts looking at it, and he says, maybe you look in the Gemara where this is, in Sanhedrin or Makkas. The Talmud says, I looked there, it's not there. Says the Rambam, Shama bi Yerushalmi. Maybe it's in Yerushalmi. So the Talmud says, I looked, it's not there. Maybe it's in the Tosefta. The Rambam is very nervous. The Rambam says, I think maybe it's in Gittin. So there's a Zaytag Sugya that relates to this. They look in Gittin, it's not there. And then afterwards, the Rambam remembers that it was in Yavamis, in a Zaytag Sugya. So the story goes, and so it says over here is that we learn from here is that even the Rambam, there was at least he forgot some for a short period of time, even makar of something he said. The Rambam writes in Hagdama to Pirish HaMishnah somewhere that it's ein b'yecholos ish liskar kol hatalmud. Ad kedei kach he says such a thing. Now, so anyway, this tshuva of the Rambam, the shaila is which Rambam is he talking about? Which Rambam in Hilchos Reitzeach has this whole backstory? So Lemaisa, Baruch Hashem, we have from Matisyahu Strashon and many others figured out exactly which Rambam it is. It's a real. Not only do I say that we have the actual tshuva, it's a real story. But what we learn from here is two very important points. That even the Rambam, there was maybe it was a short period of time, but he forgot himself because it wasn't in that specific place where the sugya is. It was in a Zaytika place in Yavamis that somehow he used it. We also see from here something else into the world of the Rambam, how he wrote his Sefer. He didn't just use the Bavli. The Rambam says maybe it's in the Yerushalmi. Why? Because he used the Yerushalmi extensively in his work. Similarly, he also used the Tosefta. These are chiburim that weren't used by everyone, but the Rambam did, and he used it. Now, moving further, there's a famous story, and this story has been said. I'm not going to say, they say it about different, you could put into the story whichever gadol you want to be, any that was Isaac in the Rambam. Basically, Adam Gadol Pliny was Isaac his whole life into the Rambam, and he felt he had answers to understand where the Rambam got what he said from everywhere. Except for three places, he had three problems that he didn't know where the Rambam got it from. He comes, he's nifter, comes up to Shemayim. Before they don him, he says, 1 minute, I need to speak to the Rambam first, if you don't mind. I've been waiting my whole life to know where's the Makaris of these three Rambams. He goes and speaks, they say, no problem. He speaks to the Rambam tells him this, it's a Tois Atfus, this is a Gemara, is a Toisefta, this is a Sefri Zutta, this is a Mechilta de Rajvi. He whacks him across the face. This is how you answer a Rambam. You have to give a whole Lamdish Shtikal Torah to understand the whole Mahalach a Rambam. This is just to illustrate that a lot of times, especially in more past 100-something years, a lot of times a makar of a Rambam really could possibly be a makar in a Gemara or even a Chazal that somehow got lost. What do I mean? What I mean is that the Rambam had a wealth, it's Nizgala Hayoim, that the Makaris, the Rambam had a Meshunadika amount of literature of Torah Shabbal Peh that a lot of times were lost. And some of these materials, when are they discovered? Only in past 100 years. So I'm going to give one example, and that is we know that for we're familiar with, there's a Mechilta the Rishmal. When one learns Chumash Shemais, there's Midrashi Halacha from Mechilta the Rabbi Shmuel. It seems Rishonim had a chibur called Mechilta the Rajbi from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, but it was lost. But we see it's quoted often by Rishonim. Somewhere around 100 years ago, certain discoveries were made, and they found some of these pieces of what they believed to be the Mechilta the Rajbi. Okay, so they found it. So different people were very excited about it. Bottom line, make a long story short, is as follows. From these Makairis, it will start to be noticed that we might now be able to have a Makar for different things. At one point, I'm not sure who was the first person who noticed it, now we have Makairis, certain Rambams that we didn't know where they're from, in this Sefer Mechilta the Rajbi. Eventually, more material came out. More discoveries in Mechilta Rajbi. Originally, it was Rav David Tzvi Hoffman worked on it. Eventually, later on, Yaakov Nachum Epstein and his Talmud Ezra Melamed, we have them. You could buy them in a local Sefarim store. They're available on Hebrew books. But what's the significance? I think it was in the 1940s, Rabbi Menachem Kasher went and wrote a sefer called Harambam VaMechilta the Rajbi, and he shows numerous Rambams. The Makar is from this Mechilta the Rajbi. It seems that he ended up redoing the Sefer, but maybe it wasn't as many as he thought originally, but definitely Makairis of the Rambam or Nizgala from this Chibur. This is just one such example. When one opens up the Kiryat Melech, one will see Keseder, a Makar for the Rambam will be this Mechilta the Rajbi. He had the Mechilta the Rajbi from Hoffman, from Yaakov Nachum Epstein. He quotes it, Keseder, and he uses it in other Sefarim of his also. I mean to say, it became part of his knowledge, and he also used to answer up the Rambam, not only from his incredible knowledge of Yerushalmi and Tosefta. You see him using Midrashim and Targumim. He'll use Targum Yonis and Ben Uziel to show a Makar for Rambam and Mechilta the Rajbi. Now, in recent years, Mechon Zichron and Aaron went ahead and they also to make a frummer version of Mechilta the Rajbi, because the edition up till now was from academics, so they need to make a frum edition. So they went and they wrote letter. The person who put it out has beautiful letters of Rav Chaim Kanievsky handling with it, and they have a list of many times how Rav Chaim Kanievsky uses it in his Sefarim, especially in Kiryat Melech, but also in other places. So we see that we see this incredible Yeda of Rav Chaim Kanievsky, that he would take his knowledge that he learned, Kol Tarakula Keseder, and he used it to answer up, to show Makairis of thousands of Rambams. Now, sometimes it could be that other people were aimed on it also, but the when you go through the Sefer, it's almost 300 pages. He a lot of times you'll open it up and you'll say, oh, they already found it. He's not trying to collect what everyone else said. It's more things that they weren't aimed on, or at least he didn't see people being aimed on, and then he would, he tries to, he writes very bekitzer, but I'll say, this Rambam, ayin here. A lot of times you'll look there, it might just shed some light to understand the Rambam. It might not be necessarily Makar, it might be a partial Makar, which also one always has to be careful about. Now, and so this is one nakuda from the Sefer that we see in this Kiryat Melech, how he uses his incredible knowledge, not only of Yerushalmi. There were other Gedolim that were outstanding in Yerushalmi that did use it to show the Rambam and his relationship with the Yerushalmi, and Tosefta also. The Vilna Gaon shows a lot with the Yerushalmi and the Rambam. In recent generations, Rav Zevin points out that already Meir Simcha and the Ragachover also were very into showing this. Rav Chaim Kanievsky also does many cases that they didn't. But what I'm saying is that he went even further. For example, the Mechilta the Rajbi, another chibur that he did was a discovery called Sifrei Zuta, which was also a more recent discovery in the past 100+ years. He also uses it for his chibur. Now, the Sefer is not full of lamdisha long shtickl Torah being to explain Rambams. It just shows you, and you open it up. A lot of times you'll see no one has the Makar, and you all of a sudden can find the Makar in here. Now, just a few more short points about this. Another thing we know about the Rambam is the Rambam that his Makairis were, at least some Makairis the Rambam was from the Ga'inim. So here, Ga'inim literature, even today as we speak, there's new discoveries and new materials of the Ga'inim are being printed. Rav Chaim Kanievsky was well aware of what was going on this too, and I just randomly opened up a page in Hilchos Shchenim, towards the end of Hilchos Shchenim, and over there I find numerous times on these pages, there could be 60, 70 Rambams on this page, he will bring you Chuvas Arif a bunch of times. He'll bring you Ritz Geus. He'll bring you Eitzer Ga'inim. He'll bring you Rav Haigain. All different things of these of early literature, Chuvas Rav Haigain and Dar Zarua to B'miyashiv Rambam. Keseder. Just looking at one page, the amount of times I was like, it's unbelievable. He even has a list where he collects various times the Rambam specifically says Gainim, but then he shows which Gainim now based on new materials that we have. And say it wasn't only that he knew what was printed until, let's say, 1900. Whatever the new discovery of many new discoveries in the past 100 years was brought to his attention, and he incorporated it in his learning, and then he used it into his Rambam to use it for different Makairos. As an example, and it was Chuvas Arif also had an influence on the Rambam, and Rav Chaim Kanievsky, and this is interesting. This Tigerman talks about it, and other places. There was a Chashav Yid, Rav David Tzvi Rothstein, a tremendous Talmud Chacham who was also nifter, who also had a kasher with Rav Chaim Kanievsky. One of the areas that this Rav David Tzvi Rothstein was involved with was the Rif putting out new Chuvas manuscript. There seems to be even more Chuvas of the Rif that still haven't been printed, and one of the things is sometimes it could help with the Rambam. So Rav David Tzvi Rothstein had these manuscripts, and he had Rav Chaim Kanievsky who wrote ha'aros on them. Sadly, Rav Chaim Kanievsky says on one of these videos that it was lost. But Rav Chaim Kanievsky, he did see a lot of material. So there's a few pages where a few times he'll say in the Chuvas Arif that he saw for the Ksaviyat of David Tzvi Rothstein that now the material, let me say the Chuvas Arif actually I think we do have, but the material, the chibur that Rav Chaim Kanievsky was worked on for this Rav David Tzvi Rothstein was lost. A sad story, Rav Chaim Kanievsky says, I think maybe on a boat, something happened. But in the introduction, he mentions that a few times, I'm quoting because I had material, let me say he's using even manuscript material that was given to him that he worked on in this work of the Rambam, which obviously is not so much found in the standard yeshiva world where you're going to be answering Rambams based on a manuscript of a Chuvas Arif. Okay. To be Messiah with one last point about a Makar of the Rambam, the Makar for Chaim Kanievsky in his Chibur on the Rambam, is the Zayar. It's a famous discussion. Tons has been written about it. Whole Chiburim even have been written about. Did the Rambam see the Zayar or not? And furthermore, because different people notice, if you say that the Rambam did have the Zayar, then we could have an additional makar of a chibur chazali, early chibur, and that would help us understand certain Rambams. Famously, Rabbi Margolis wrote a series of articles, eventually was put into a booklet, and then eventually, pretty recently, put into a sefer of various Zayar. If we assume the Rambam had the Zayar, we could understand the makar from many different Rambams. Rav Chaim Kanievsky does, the Vilna Gaon also sometimes seems to go with this. Rav Chaim Kanievsky a bunch of times uses the Zayar, which is showing an interesting point about Rav Chaim Kanievsky, how he learned the Zayar. Again, this is using it in halachic as a halachic chibur, but he's using it throughout as a makar for the Rambam. Sometimes interesting, he quotes it based on, he says, Rabbi Margolis. He had a tremendous chavivus for Rabbi Margolis. He knew him. He met him a few times in Tel Aviv library, and he liked him a lot. And he says also that the Chazon Ish also had a special chiba for Rabbi Margolis, and he was very makbet to quote things that he saw from Rabbi Margolis in his name. And it's interesting is because a lot of people, especially in Bnei Brak, didn't like Rabbi Margolis' his tziyoni aspect to him, so much so, I think I saw it, but I heard about it, like the Margolis Hayam was allowed in Panovich, so to speak, but the Bachram always were makbet to cross out the dating in the beginning of the Sefer because it's a Zionistic thing, but Chaim Kanievsky had no problem with him, and he quotes him Keseder in his Kiryat Melech. Now, Baruch Chaim Kanievsky at the end of the Sefer does say he's not saying that the Rambam really had the Zayar. It could be the Rambam had another early makar from Ga'inim that might have had the Zayar, but be that as it may, the Zayar is also another thing for Chaim Kanievsky. To conclude, with one last piece of information relating to all this, is that there's a Rambam in the Rambam, as I said, doesn't usually quote his Makairis, and he says things stam. Does the Rambam ever quote a Tana or a Moira in his Sefer? So it seems the story goes, Rabbi Cheskel Feivel brings down the story, that one time someone went to him and said about a certain Rambam, where the Rambam quotes a name of a Tana. This was actually this was the name of a Amira. And the name of the Amira was Weir in Hilchos Mishpatim, where he quotes Rava. Okay. And the shaila was, does the Rambam ever do such a thing? So the story goes that Zalman said that he remembers another such place. Rav Chaim Kanievsky, again, with his incredible Bakiyas, whatever's pshat in this story with Rav Zalman, if there is a pshat even, but Rav Chaim Kanievsky in a few places has a long list of different places where the Rambam is quoted that the Rambam was quoting either a name of Tanaim or Amaram. He has this list in the back of a sefer, and then in the various editions, he adds to this list. Akapanim, this is some of the things that I think we could learn from this incredible Chibur Kiryat Melech, where Rav Chaim Kanievsky used his incredible Yeda in Torah, and he used this special Yeda of his in Torah of all areas of Torah, as I mentioned, in Yerushalmi, in Bavli, in Tosefta, in Midrashi Halacha, of even Chiburim that no one uses today, or very few people use today, such as Medrash Mechilta the Rajbi, to find thousands of Makairos of the Rambam in this Chibur, and it's remarkable, and it's good to know, it's available on Hebrew books, that this Chibur Kiryat Melech exists. And not only does it exist, it's kedai to there's two things we can learn. One is, in case someone has a Rambam, doesn't have the Makar, to look over there. Yes, we have Frankel Rambam, Baruch Hashem has an incredible wealth of information. But second, it's we learn from here that we see the use. It's not only that he sat and learned. Reb Chaim just sat and learned, and Keseder, as his chayvus, as he liked to call it, but he used it for his chiburim, and this is the first such chibur that I would like to demonstrate. One nekuda, we can learn how it was just remarkable what he did with the Sefer Kiryat Melech, and that's why it impressed so many gedolim, as his father in the Askama of it called it Sefer Anifla. That's the first of the Sefer of the Sefarim of the many Sefarim of Chaim Kanievsky that I hope to discuss.
Okay, wow, fascinating. A lot of information to digest. I don't know how you put it all together to give it over in such a short amount of time. Okay, so thank you for this. Mitzvah Shem, let's get back together, focus on some of the other Sefarim, some of the unique Sefarim, and hear a little bit about, how Reb Chaim was able to put together some of the other Sefarim. What were the ideas of the other Sefarim, the Chiburim that he wrote? Thank you very much.